So our first presentation is focused again on a very long-standing issue for marketers, how to brand products in foreign markets. And this presentation will examine branding cultural products, again, such as those with leisure brands. And we have Professors Yong Liu from the University of Arizona and Chi Sun from Shanghai University of Finance and Economics, who will join us to share their findings and insights. Welcome, Chi and Yong.
Thank you, Chris, and hello, everyone. Thank you very much to the Journal of Marketing for this great opportunity to present our research. This paper I did with my co-author Qi from Shanghai University of Finance Economics, and Weihe Gao and Li Ji, both at Shanghai University of Finance Economics. The issue we look at in this paper is really, I think, in the core of people's lives. They consume media and entertainment products, and we look at for cultural products in general, when they enter international markets, what kind of marketing strategies they should take. The categories we are looking at, you can think about movies, publishing for books, magazines, and of course, music, all these different entertainment products categories. The value of these products in the cultural category has been growing and already exceeded $800 billion in the US alone in 2016. Now, when cultural products look at foreign markets for exporting, we can see over the years that market has been growing very fast and becoming increasingly important for the US publishers, studios, and music companies. So one example I have here is a book example of Harry Potter. The book series has been translated into more than 80 languages worldwide. Has a lot of influence on people, but also accounts for a lot of revenue for the publishers and the author. Now, in Hollywood, for the movie example, started, I think, from 2016, the share of international box office revenue has been more than 70% of the total box office revenue that the studios they receive. With this kind of significant in the market share for international sales, we want to ask this question for the companies in the US, what kind of brand name strategies they should adopt when they enter the new market in a foreign country. The translation of brand names sounds like an easy job. However, when you look at cultural products, that may not be very easy because there are certain elements of a cultural product makes translation difficult. In the general kind of business and marketing strategy domain, the most dominant way to look at brand name strategies in a foreign country is to look at, do I want to use the standardized brand name in all countries, or do I want to adapt, right, to local conditions? This has been the most dominant way to look at market entry. However, our point of view in this study is that even though this is useful and important, it does not capture the entire kind of domain of cultural products. One reason is for cultural products, these kind of products, they are sold and they are consumed mainly for content. By content, we mean, for example, if you look at movies, the plot, the character, the stories, those are the content that people, they consume for. Same thing for the novel, right? The plot, the storyline. This kind of content is very often nuanced, and by definition, being cultural products, they are very often culture specific. So the consumers in a foreign country, they may not know the background and the cultural kind of significance of the story that is very familiar to a US audience. As a result, there has been anecdotal evidence that studios, book publishers, they should use brand name as a cue to suggest content to the foreign audience, as a result, to attract more people to buy the product. So the example I have here, this is the movie Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, right, in the US. However, when this movie was exported to foreign countries, here, the example is for Israel. Meatball is not a typical kind of consumption category in that country, so they find the meatball equivalent, right, the falafel, to be used in translation. In this way, the movie is using a locally kind of appealing kind of a term to sell the movie. The marketing issues we try to look at, to start with, brand name translation is just one line of words. Does this have any impact on the sales of the product, right, the cultural products in international markets? If there's any product, in what way? If there's any impact, in what ways? So the angles we took in this study has two elements. One is the brand name similarity. We captured this concept with the correlation between the domestic market, right? What is the brand name, the movie title in the US market, and how is that similar or different from the translated title in a foreign country? The other element is about the brand name itself in the foreign country, how informative this translated brand name is in reflecting or suggesting the movie, the product content. So we try to quantify this kind of impact, and hopefully based on our findings, we can provide useful recommendations to managers in entertainment products, for cultural products in general, and in our case, for Hollywood managers. This is a quick example about how we capture and why do we think similarity and informativeness are important. For the book, Gone with the Wind, there are two different ways to translate this book into the Chinese version of the book. So you can see on top of the screen, the translation number 1 is a single word, piao, right? That's in the Chinese character for just windy and flying. So literally it means gone with the wind. So this is the same meaning, same translation. So this is an example of high similarity between foreign brand and the domestic brand, but low informativeness. It does not reflect the background of the Civil War or these plots. The second translation is a low similarity, but high informative translation. So this is also in the Chinese market. The Chinese translation is 乱世佳人, the 4 Chinese characters. It means lady in wartime, right? So this comes much closer to what this movie is about. So this is a simple starting example. And we look at these two strategies, one on similarity and one on informativeness across all the Hollywood movies that were exported to Chinese market from 2011 to 2018. The reasons we chose the US and the Chinese market to study, there are two reasons. One is the translation between English and Chinese is highly challenging because the English system is phonographic, it's sound-based system, and the Chinese one is logographic, it's shape-based, right? So the translation between these two has been regarded as highly challenging. The second reason we choose to study US-China market is that China has emerged in recent years as the second largest movie market after the US. So for Hollywood studios, the Chinese market is now the largest foreign market for its products. So it's quite substantial in value. And then we quantify these two strategies, right? One is on similarity, the other one is informativeness, being high, being low, measured on a 1 to 7 point scale on weekly box office sales of these movies in China. So let me give you maybe just 1 or 2 quick examples in the data. If you look at, so here are 4 movies. They capture different levels of similarity in the brand names and different levels of informativeness in the translated brand name. If you look at, let's say, the third one, right? So this is the 33. The movie is about is a rescue mission. It's kind of adventure movie from the center, the heart of the earth. So the 33 itself, the title does not reflect a storyline, right? Now, if you look at the translated Chinese title, it's called a 地心营救. It's 4 words. It means rescue mission from the heart of the earth. So in this case, it's highly informative about the content, about storyline. However, it's very different from the original English title, which is just the 33 days, right? So this is one example of the, you can think about 2 by 2, this kind of metrics for high and low similarity and informativeness. So eventually with those strategies quantified, we find 4 different things I hope you can find interesting. First, we find out the similarity between the translated and the original movie titles, right? This is the first element of the translation. It has a pretty high impact on box office revenue in China. Higher similarity, higher sales in foreign country. This effect also becomes stronger when the movie itself has a better performance in the domestic US market. The reason about this is when you have this high similarity between 2 titles, the better performance in the domestic market can be more easily transferred to the foreign market because of the connection. So that's the first one. And the second one, we also find a higher informativeness of the translated title leads to higher box office sales in the foreign country. So in addition to these 2, we did another level of analysis. We find out actually similarity and informativeness not only works by themselves, they also work together to kind of reinforce each other's impact. So for one translated movie title, if you have higher similarity between the 2 titles, right, that enhances the impact of the informativeness of the translated title itself. So there is this joint effect, right? So it's better to do 2 of this at the same time. We found out both of these effects, the similarity effects and informativeness effects, they're the strongest when the movie is just released in a foreign country. However, these effects, they gradually goes down when time passes, right? So for each movie in the theater, it's like 10 weeks, and these effects goes away starting with the 2nd week. The reason is there are other information about the movie, especially word of mouth from consumers, become to take shape in the 2nd week, and then the movie title effects can reduce. So those are the 4 findings we want to highlight. How do we translate these findings into real box office numbers? So we did a little simulation at the end of the paper. What we did is we looked at all the movies in our sample. We take the strategies, one on similarity, the other one on informativeness. We look at if I can increase similarity of a movie, right, by 1 point. Now remember, we have the scale being from 1 to 7. It's a 7-point scale. Just raise similarity by 1 point, right? We can increase the foreign box office sales by 3.6%. That is a quite substantial increase in return because if you look at translation, right, literally this strategy has no cost. It's just wording, right? We find similar things for informativeness. If you can increase informativeness of the translated title by 1 point on a 7-point scale, you can also increase revenue by almost 3%. Together, if the studios can make similarity higher and the informativeness higher, both by 1 point, there is going to be a 7.46% increase in foreign sales. sometimes we have, as managers, we have to make choices, right? So we have two strategies. One is similarity, the other one is informativeness. Now, which one is more important? Which one, if I can do only one, which one is more profitable? So this shows actually it depends on the movie. For the movie that has a very good and very high domestic sales in the US, for those movies, similarity is much more important to try to create. So the 4.35 and 3.30, that is the difference in terms of the box office increase when you look at different movies with domestic sales record. And on informativeness is the same thing. You look at movies that has a greater culture gap between the US and China, and other movies with a smaller culture gap. It is the first group, the movies with greater culture gap, that needs a more informative title. Okay, so these are the main findings we have, and some quantified numbers to measure profits and return. So I guess we're on time and to answer any questions and hear any comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yong and Shi. We really appreciate the insights. Remember, we have now some time for questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, make sure that you type that into the Q&A tab that you see, not the studio chat tab, and then we'll get those screened for you. So one thing I noticed, my own question I'll start with, I guess, is there is this natural trade-off, as you said, you know, often between informativeness and similarity. And so it seems, maybe one simple view that I had about this when you were sharing was that, does it mean that if we want to try to achieve both, does it mean that the original US film needs to be more informative so that then when the translation occurs, then you're able to achieve both? Is that one implication of what you found?
That's a great question, Chris. So the base of our analysis is that, so there are two things. One is the Chinese audience, they only see the Chinese title, right? Translated title in theaters, in the promotion materials, and that's what influenced them, okay? So eventually we measure that level of informativeness in the Chinese title. The second part of this goes into your question more directly. If the US domestic title, right, has a higher level of informativeness, then if you do just a similar translation, by definition, the Chinese one will also have a higher level of informativeness. What we found out is that the US movies, the domestic title, they are not always informative. There is a whole kind of range of low and high informativeness movie titles in the US. As a result, if we do a correlation check, right, between the translated similarity and informativeness, the correlation is very low. Okay, so there is no basically like a relationship between similarity and informativeness. If all the US domestic title they're informative, then for the studios the job becomes easier. You just translate this as similar as possible.
Right, that makes sense to me. So Alan has a question,
yeah.
Kind of two parts here that are related. So it's basically about whether Chinese consumers are aware of the similarities. So for example, do promotional materials in China give the original name in English? And similarly, are Chinese consumers aware of the box office performance in the US? And these might, I guess, influence some of the interpretations or their response to the cues that the studios are giving them in the brand name.
That's right. That's right. These two questions, but thank you first, Alan, right, for the questions. These two questions go directly to the empirical measurements of our data sample. On the first question, the Chinese audience, they are not very often familiar with Similarity itself, because you have to look at in China how the movies is promoted. In the U.S., in our market here, TV advertising, it is still the dominant way to do promotion before release. In China, even though the movie production has picked up, movie promotion has not. So you don't see the movie studios spend a lot of money on promoting a movie, especially not on network TV. Very different from the U.S. market. So the English title of the original movie does not show up at all in all the promotion activities. People only see the Chinese translated title, right? So that's to the first one. The second one, do people in China know the correlation between the connection between the U.S. Movie sales and Chinese movie? This one they're looking at. So this question, we did a survey for this study. It looks like, especially the young people, right, the main target customer segment, they know from the rankings of the news report, they know what movies, for example, this week ranked very high, right? So they know that ranking. That ranking through the English title and with a lot of chatting and forum discussions on the website can get into the Chinese market. That's where we were assuming when the similarity between the domestic market and the Chinese market is very high, people are more likely, right, to form a connection between the two movies. As a result, a movie that performs better in the U.S. can influence the Chinese consumers. That is through that similarity effects. They don't know there's no English title on the promotion materials. However, people can find out that on the internet themselves.
Wonderful. So we have an array of different questions. I'll ask some question askers to actually look at the article, which we have up on the website, and we can point you to the link for some questions around endogeneity. But maybe just two clarification questions. How did you measure cultural gap, which you used in one of your analysis here at the end? There's a question about from Errol about how you did that.
Yeah, that's one of the two main measures we have. So to measure the informativeness, right? That is like to what extent the translated title reflects the English, the movie itself. We tied that one to different cultural gaps of the movie. In other words, certain movies, they have a larger cultural gap than other movies. How do we measure cultural gap? We relied on past research on movie genres. So certain genres, you can think about maybe action movies, adventure movies. The appeal of those movies are really kind of universal, right? People in every country, they like graphical kind of scenes and action scenes. Those does not need to have a lot of culture things in it. On the other side, movies, genres like comedy movies and some drama movies, right? Documentary movies. Those ones are much more kind of culture specific. So we measure basically based on movie genres, action movies, adventure movies as have a low culture gap. The other movies have a higher culture gap.
Wonderful. So we have a number of questions that ask about generalization. So do you feel that this generalizes across different types of movies that might be out there? And then also perhaps movies, Stephanie's asking about movies with actors that perhaps are unknown. Because that has information value as well. So do you see this generalizing, and what's the role of the actors in that, in the response that consumers are having?
Totally. I think, again, there are like maybe two different angles to look at this. One is about to extent this thing is kind of generalizable, right? I think not only within movies, you can think about similar situations and decisions for books, for TV shows, for even some radio programs. So I think there is a lot of things you can generalize from our kind of study to other markets. The other angle is for the stars, right? There are a lot of stars. They are famous in the U.S. Those the same people. They are also very famous in China. So I think you can think about maybe classifying a movie with no star as having like a higher culture gap, right? For those no star movies, people in China needs to know more about it to be attracted. That's my kind of gut feeling. But this question is very interesting because it taps into the other thing the Hollywood studios have been doing in producing movies. If they have the target market to be international, they try to use localized stars in the movie. That has happened already with the Hollywood movies that appeals to the Chinese market, like Mulan, right? These kind of movies, they also use Chinese stars just to build, to reduce a gap between the two countries.
Well, since you brought up the issue of using stars, so we've been focusing on the brand name title. Are there other marketing strategies that Hollywood or even other types of producers of these cultural products that they're adopting in international markets like China? Do you see any other manifestations of this that would be interesting to note from your research?
Yeah, Chris. Sorry, may I add a point here? So.
Go ahead, Steve. Yeah.
Yeah, so I saw a question about the human brand. I say for the let's say for the name of actors. So now for some actors, their Chinese name are just a phonetic translation in Chinese. So the Chinese just mimic their pronunciation of their names in English. But for some actors or actresses, their Chinese name are real Chinese name. They're just they have a real meanings in Chinese. So basically, there are two ways to translate that, even the actor's real name in Chinese. So the similarity and the informativeness. So I think our framework can be somehow generalized to other contexts here, not only for the title of the book, but even for some maybe in other contexts. Yeah.
I think that's super interesting, and that was actually a question from Karthik about whether these findings in this framework might generalize to other types of human brands. So Karthik, we think you're right on there in terms of your intuition about that. So maybe just one final question, because you guys, I mean, Chi, you're in China, which we appreciate you getting up in the middle of the night to do this, and Yong, you're here in the United States. Just looking at the U.S., and we'll finish with this, the U.S. trade relationship. How has the U.S. movie industry played a role in that, just for our own interest, if you can shed any light on that for us?
Yeah, Chi, go ahead with
okay. Yeah, I think that maybe at least to my surprise, I just read recently that the movie markets are actually a central topic in the U.S. and the China trade talks. So now the China that now impose quotas on the number of movies that can be imported into from the U.S. So this is actually a key issue because let's say the Hollywood I think is one of the top 10 exporting sectors for U.S. to China. So I think the trade barrier is definitely an issue. And another one is the competitive landscape is different. Let's say maybe 20 years ago, you pick any Hollywood movie and it can, and then show it in China, it can, let's say, the top 10 movies in China that year. But now things change. And it's not that easy for a Hollywood movie to claim a large box office revenue in China. So the competition is fierce. It's really really different for the Hollywood studios. I think from the production, from the trade policies, I think there are many issues to do the research or something like that. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Chi. That's interesting, and thank you both, Yang and Chi, for this interesting paper. Again, the paper is available on the Journal of Marketing, and TJ will actually post a link to that in the chat for all of you that would like to follow up with some of the technical details. So thank you both.
Thank you, Chris.